I'm Heidi Heppeler, and welcome to the show. This is an abbreviated version of my show, It's All Good. Well, actually, it's the first version of my show. But because it is abbreviated, tonight we will not have our musical guest and we will not have our comic guest. But the guest we have is so wonderful, we don't need a comedian. My guest tonight is Bob Rybolt, who is a published author, a historian, and presently he's the command historian of the 63rd Regional Support Command here in Mountain View, which is one of 4 regional support commands in the United States. They have all 7 states in the Southwest. So Bob is a specialist on frontier history and Western history, and he knows all about everything about Western history. Without further ado, let me introduce Bob Rybolt.
Thanks, Heidi.
Good evening, Bob. It was so good to have you on the show. And how long have you been in the area?
3 years, about 3 years. I got the assignment from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
Oh, wonderful. Now, you told me a funny story once about when you first became interested in frontier history. Could you tell us about that?
Which story is that? I tell
When
somebody
you,
else.
I know. When you were a child in Nebraska.
Oh, I was raised in western Nebraska, where it butts up against Wyoming and Colorado. And when I was a kid, my dad would, in Sundays, we would, particularly after a rain, we would go out to areas and we would look for a place near water, a creek, a place that was terraced, a little bit high so you're protected from the floodplain, where there'd be some hills protecting it from the prevailing winds, and go out there and we would always find projectile points. Arrowheads is what the common term is, and pottery sherds. And as a little boy, well, even as now as a man, I get an immense thrill out of picking up one of those, and one feels very privileged because you're the first person in maybe 1,000 years that has ever touched that.
And you're also an anthropologist.
Well, yeah, that's part of. In the United States, archaeology is part of the science of anthropology. In Europe, it's primarily history. Archaeology being a subdiscipline of history.
That's what I was trying to think of in the introduction.
I specialized in Plains archaeology, both Plains Indians and Plains historical archaeology. And that's after the written word. Go out on places like, a Deadwood Trail. I'm sure everybody's heard of Deadwood in South Dakota, Calamity Jane, Wild Bill Hickok. And during the Black Hills Gold Rush of the 1870s, miners, freighters, cowboys that have to get there, they of course use the trails, and they left stuff that for us to find today: cartridge casings, oxen shoes, horseshoes, and again, you pick up one of these things and you wonder, gosh, could Sam Bass have dropped this, or maybe it was Wild Bill himself? And how these artifacts, their relationship to one another, will all tell us a story. Recently, they had archaeological digs at Little Bighorn, Custer's last stand, and they studied things as minute as those cartridge casings, and were able to apply modern science, forensic science, and actually say that this cartridge casing found here and that one found over there 100 yards away were fired by the same rifle. Oh, so they were able to actually trace the movement of both soldier and Sioux Cheyenne warriors across the battlefield, and they answered some mysteries that have been with us for years. To me, that's absolutely fascinating, where there's no written word or spoken word to tell us the story. We had a whole battlefield that was really kind of a large crime scene search. Archaeologists use the same techniques, the same sciences as detectives do.
I want you to tell us more about the local area, which I know you know a lot about, but first you have had so many other wonderful jobs, and I'd like you to tell us one about when you were with the park rangers in Washington, D.C.
Oh, well, I started my career after college as a park service as a park ranger with the National Park Service, and started at Little Bighorn, Montana. And then one of those nameless bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. decided I needed an urban experience in my career, so they sent me from Montana to Washington, D.C. on the National Mall, which was really very interesting, and it was privileged. By the National Mall, I'm talking about the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, World War II Memorial now, Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and we had a lot of foreign visitors, and it was my job to tell them basically about the United States, and that's always a privilege. But it fell to me to organize a special program for Independence Day, and we were going to have 1 million people in the National Mall for 4th of July. And we just opened up the World War II Memorial. So I thought, well, let's get some reenactors, guys that can portray World War II soldiers. And I traced down and I found people that actually had World War II tanks. And we were going to have a parade. We'd organized all this and what have you, and we're going to parade these Sherman tanks down Pennsylvania Avenue, and then they're going to go into bivouac on the National Mall right near the Washington Monument. And it never occurred to me that the Secret Service would be interested in tanks coming down Pennsylvania Avenue.
But it all ended well.
Oh yeah, yeah. They were very concerned about it. And but we let them inspect, and they knew that we didn't have tanks that were capable of shooting cartridges or anything like this.
And then you eventually came to Moffett Field,
well,
to this area.
Yeah, I was in D.C. when 9/11. And of course, the Pentagon was less than a mile away.
Right.
And I was over there the next day, did what I could, helped what I could. And I'm an old war horse, an old soldier, and it kind of made me mad. And I felt like I should be involved somehow. Tried to get a recall to the Army, but they told me they didn't need any 55-year-old, 230-pound infantry officers. But the Air Force had a historian's position open. And part of the deal was you had to agree to deploy to either Afghanistan or Iraq. And I know a lot of people probably won't understand this, but I felt like I should do that. So I left the Park Service and went into the history field, military history, initially with the Air Force. And then again, as you're well aware too, in federal service, you spend so much time in one pay grade. If you want a promotion with more responsibility, you basically have to move. So from there, I went to the Army at the Command General Staff College, and from there to 63rd Regional Support Command.
Where we are now, or you are now, and I was also. So what are some of the interesting things, who are some of the interesting people in this area that you have studied?
Well, part of my duties with the 63rd is I'm responsible for professional military education. So naturally, we took all these soldiers over to Fort Point, which is Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which is National Park Service. And along with that, we looked at and studied military response to the San Francisco earthquake in 1906. And I got to meet some old historical friends. In 1906, the commander of the Presidio was General Frederick Funston, who was a Kansas boy, Fighting Freddie Funston. And Fred Funston had fought in the Spanish-American War and the Philippine insurrection. He was a Medal of Honor holder. He'd received the Medal of Honor. And the only rank that he ever held in the regular Army was Brigadier General. So when the earthquake hit, it was his job to mobilize the troops and go over and protect property. And,
we met last year during the Hispanic Heritage Program at the 63rd. Sure. I was the MC. I will be again this year on October 4th.
And I'll be there.
You did a historical presentation, so I believe that's open to the public. It's on a Thursday or Friday. It's at 10 o'clock. And Bob will be speaking there. He'll be talking about all the other great things. We unfortunately did not have enough time to talk about all the colorful characters in the area, but you will hopefully be back and we will have more time to go through the Murrieta brothers and
Joaquin Murrieta.
Joaquin Murrieta, whose head was put into a keg of whiskey so that the Rangers would prove that he was alive.
Rangers,
the California Rangers and many others.
Redwoods would probably take issue with them cutting off heads.
We'll look forward to having you back to talk about all that, and it has been such a joy to have you as a guest, and thank you again. It's just great to see you.
Good.
I'm Heidi Hepler, and it's all good.